concept map, but just to give us a refresher of where we've been before your exam and where we're going to start heading today. Before the exam, we started off defining what leadership is, right? And we gave the whole definition. Influence was a huge part of that definition. So we said, well, we need to define what influence is. And that's where we talked about power. Then we started off with the trait approach. We said, okay, we've got to start, all leadership research started looking at the leader first, very leader-centric. And that was all about who the leader is or who the leaders are. Looked at a bunch of theories there. Then we dived into the behavior approach. So what the leader does. Okay, so that's where we really got this idea of styles. Those styles being based off of either relationship or task orientation. Bunch of theories there that we talked about. Then we kind of segued back and said, okay, before we move forward, we've got to talk a little bit about motivation, this idea of influence, that, if we want people to do what we want them to do, we also as leaders need to understand why people do the things they do. And that's where we talked about our 5 motivation theories that are can all kind of be summarized under this idea of intrinsic and extrinsic process or motivation. So today, we're going into kind of the next section of leadership theories, and all of these theories are going to be part of what I call the situational approach. And so what's going to be a little bit different about this approach is that we're not just going to focus on who the leader is. We're not going to just look at what the leader does. We now care about how the leader acts. What is the difference between what the leader does and how a leader acts? Because they kind of sound like they could be the same thing, right? But what could... The way they carry themselves? Their actions, how they react to different situations, okay? So what the leader does is really kind of putting people in a box and saying you're either task-oriented or relationship-oriented, and that this is just part of who you are, so this is going to influence your leadership style and how you approach situations. Again, still very leader-centric. We're now stepping out of that paradigm and saying just looking at the leader is not giving us enough information. So with these situational approaches, we're going to start considering maybe our followers a little bit more, but we're going to start looking at the situation itself and seeing how does, when a leader gets put in a situation, how do they react? How do they adjust to what's going on around them? And the very first theory that we're going to talk about with this is probably, I feel like I say this a lot about theories. I'm always like, this is my favorite. But I would say beyond it just probably being one of my favorite, I think it's one of the most important. Just like I told y'all, power and task and relationship is going to be something you're going to see around you all the time now. LMX theory, or leader-member exchange, and looking at how the leader acts is probably something that you are going to be able to reflect back on and refer to well beyond this particular class. So again, it's called leader-member exchange, but we shorten it and we call it LMX theory. So here's what it is. Similar to our definition of leadership, we say that LMX is a process. And it's all on this premise of we need to understand how a leader interacts with followers. Okay? But here's what's really cool about this theory. It's not just about how leaders interact with followers. It turns the table and says, well, how do followers interact with leaders? So it starts to see this interaction as a two-way street. If I were to draw an arrow from me to Bailey, that would say, I'm the leader, Bailey's the follower, and all I care about is how does the leader interact with Bailey. But an LMX researcher would say, how does that happen? But let's turn the arrow the other way too. How does Bailey react with Dr. Klein? Right? So this one looks at followers, and it's going to look at the context. So 2 new variables that we're adding into this leadership process. So again, going back to our definition of leadership, we've talked about the fact that there's this influential component, but then we also have in our definition that it's an individual influencing a group of individuals. We haven't even talked about who the group of individuals are yet. And LMX is going to help us take that step to get there. So it's based on this premise of a dyadic relationship. So a dyad. How many things are involved when you say something's a dyad? 2. Dyad means 2. And so again, here's something that's unique. We think back to even like Blake and Mouton's leadership grid when it was trying to define styles for leaders. It was saying that based on your task and relationship, you might be an authoritarian leader. And it was making this assumption that because that was your orientation, that is the type of leadership style you would apply in all situations with all people. And even here in class, y'all said, that doesn't seem right. Should everyone be treated the same? I mean, we like fairness, but in reality, we're all individuals, right? And what works for one individual isn't going to work for another when it comes to leadership styles. And so LMX is one of the first theories that really started looking at the relationship between leader and follower at an individual level, not at a group level. And it started saying that you might be an authoritarian leader, and that may work for my relationship with Bailey, but that's not going to work with my relationship with Ashley. And so these 2 relationships, I have a dyadic relationship here, I have a dyadic relationship here, and they may look totally different. Do we see this in real life? Have you ever had someone in your life, or you meet somebody that your friends know, and you have one friend tell you that person's great, and then you have another person tell you they think they suck? And then you're like, how can you have 2 such different opinions about the same person? It's because of this dyadic relationship. And again, research has shown that this relationship exists. We all have individual relationships with each other. So some assumptions that we need to look at with LMX. LMX is saying we cannot treat people in this collective way, this big collective way that, we take a paintbrush, we dip it in blue paint, and we just paint everybody blue. It's not going to work. So we've got to pay attention to the differences that exist in these multiple dyadic relationships. And that should determine how a leader acts. Okay? Clear as mud? So this is a pretty good representation of like what those relationships look like. We call it the vertical dyad linkage. So again, LMX first started with simply studying what do these relationships look like? What is this vertical dyadic relationship? And what can possibly be different about them? All right? And again, you'll notice here the arrow points both ways. And so it's one of the first theories that says we need to pay attention as much from the follower's perspective about the relationship as we do the leader's perspective of the relationship. And then we started saying, as they were studying, these researchers were studying these vertical dyad linkages, they started noticing this phenomenon happen. That as they were looking at, okay, what are the unique differences between each of the relationships, it became very obvious that there would be like a group of people who seemed to have really good relationships, both the leader and the follower thought so, and they just seemed to be closer with the leader. And then you had this group that, again, same leader, but different relationships, that maybe the leader thought these relationships were okay, but the followers were like, nah, I mean, it's fine, but nah, not so good. And they started to know that they were kind of acting on the fringes a little bit in the organization. And so again, we kind of started, even though we were trying to get away from this idea of like grouping, it was almost like the results of these relationships were starting to group themselves anyways. We call this the in and out group phenomenon. And y'all, this is the thing you are going to see for the rest of your life. Because of the unique relationships that leaders have with each of their followers, this natural phenomenon starts to happen where people become part of an in-group, meaning that they have a high-quality relationship with the leader. And again, both parties perceive that relationship to be high quality. But then you have people of the same organization working with the same leader who are considered part of the out-group. That their relationship, based on what the leader and the followers say, don't appear to be as much high quality. We can think of a lot of examples in life where in and out groups happen. Who in here played sports? On a sports team, were there certain kids that just seemed to be like the coach's pet? And it was like, and then certain people on the team that it didn't matter what they did, just never seemed to have a good relationship with the coach. Which group were you a part of? Anybody ever feel like a part of the out group? Why? What were some situations you've been in where you felt like you were part of the out group, and what contributed to that?
I know money's a factor. Like,
Say it a little louder.
money.
Money? Okay, why?
So there was a girl whose like parents would pretty much like pay for anything that coach ever needed for like the club or the association, and so like that kid definitely was like that coach's like pet.
Oh yeah. The more involved your parents are on the boosters, the more playing time sometimes the children got. Right? What's an example of a time you felt like part of the out group, and what made you feel that way?
My age.
How so?
Well, when I made it on varsity freshman year, all the girls were obviously juniors and seniors, and I was one of the freshmen on the team, and it just stuck out to. I was in conversations with them. It's when they didn't like me that I was the only freshman on the team. Same with the coach too. I mean, I felt like I was in with the coach, but not with the other girls, I guess.
What about the captain of the squad?
I knew her, like I played softball with her before, but
She never really made an effort.
not really, no.
So maybe in your situation, the leader isn't the coach, the leader is the captain.
Yeah.
And so the captain didn't really make you feel like a part of the team or the squad because of your age.
Yeah.
So then that influenced your relationships with others, and again kind of put you in that out group situation.
Yeah.
That's a good example too. How does this happen in the classroom? What do in and out groups look like in classrooms? We consider a teacher as a leader. Do teachers have pets?
Yeah.
Are there groups of students in class that appear like the out group? Yeah. So again, it's interesting that this is I don't want to say it's natural because there's things we can do to mitigate it, but research has shown over and over again that based on the relationship that leaders and followers have, an in-group and an out-group is going to be created. What does this mean to leaders? If we know that this happens, what should this challenge us to do?
Just like being aware of like how inclusive you are of the group and not like giving extra responsibilities to a certain person even though you think like they are highly dependable. Like maybe like if someone can do it like is 50% as good as you or something like that, like giving it to like an out group person or someone that's maybe not as outspoken, just so they feel included, I guess.
It is our job as leaders to try to make everyone feel like they are part of the in-group. Write that down, repeat it a million times. If there is something that I think we don't do a good enough job at, is that we should be trying to make everyone think they're a part of our out group or in group. And the reason why I say think is that I think we can't be unrealistic in saying that we're always going to like everybody. Okay? I don't think that'd be fair. Sometimes personalities just don't mesh, right? But if you're, and I like using the teacher example in this. If you're a teacher, and you just have that student that drives you bonkers, right? Should that student ever know that they drive you bonkers? No. But do teachers let kids know they drive them crazy? Oh yeah. Right? So we really have to think about what are we doing to invest in that relationship to where every person who's a part of our sphere of leadership feels like they're part of our in-group. And there are some repercussions or outcomes of these relationships. So like it says up here, if you're in the in-group, you tend to have access to more information, you have influence over others, it makes you more confident, and you have this concern from the leader. So you tend to have, the leader caring more about what goes on with you. Doesn't mean that you are more confident, doesn't mean that you do have more influence, but you feel that way as the follower, right? Because you're part of the in-group, right? You feel like you're getting that insider information and more attention is being paid to you. And so because of that, because as the follower you feel that way in the in-group, you become more dependable, you tend to be more involved in what goes on, and you communicate a lot more. And again, those may not be natural inclinations of yours, but because you feel like the in-group, it's almost like motivation. You're a little bit more motivated to do more for that particular leader. On the other hand, if you feel like as a follower you're part of the out-group, you think, well, I must not get along with the leader. And because that attitude develops, you just come to the work, you do your job, you go home, right? You're not really given a lot more than what's asked of you. And that's kind of it. That does not mean that these individuals in the out-group aren't dependable, aren't good communicators, may not be really good at influencing others. It's just that they develop this attitude of, leader doesn't care about me, so I'm not going to care about what they're asking me to do. The quality of a relationship can have a huge impact on businesses. So LMX has been studied the most in business situations. And a lot of times when we look at things like employee turnover, job satisfaction, productivity, rather than it boiling down to just, is someone skilled? Are they in the right job? Most of the time, people are leaving jobs or not doing certain things at the job based on their perception of what their relationship is with their boss. What do y'all think about that? Think that's accurate?
Extremely.
Yeah. So relationship. What we're kind of starting to see, going back to behavior approach, is that maybe relationship's a little bit more important than what we thought it was, right? And maybe a relationship needs to be thought of in all things. So, again, LMX is probably one of the theories that has been studied the most out of any we'll study this semester. We're not going to go through all these specific things today because we're going to do a case study. But no, you have these slides to have these notes. It's important to know kind of the outcomes of why we want to care about relationships between leaders and followers. If we have high quality relationships, more people are going to feel like they're a part of the in-group. And so, again, from just a practical standpoint, we're going to see things like less employee turnover, greater participation, greater job satisfaction. Okay? Another thing to know about this is it is a prescriptive approach to leadership. So everything that we've been doing prior to this and talking about prior to this has been trying to predict what effective leadership is. And so we want to know, what do we consider the best traits for leaders to be in order to be effective? And we want to know that list because we want to be able to predict whether someone's going to be effective or not. Has that worked? Not really. So this is one of the first one that tries to prescribe. And so what it's saying is that if you can develop and do these certain things to develop high quality relationships, we can say you're going to be an effective leader. It's kind of, again, it's giving you a dose of what to do. And kind of this prescription that you take is called the leadership making process. And so your chapter talks about these 3 different phases to kind of understand if you can identify that maybe there's someone, again, that you're leading that perceives to be in the out group. That maybe you just kind of know, we don't have a really strong, high quality relationship. Then you can look at this leadership making process, understand kind of how relationships develop, and you can work towards building a higher quality relationship with that person. Those 3 phases are the stranger phase, the acquaintance phase, and the mature partnership phase. Important to know this. So you can see here, roles change depending on what phase you're in. How the leader and follower influence each other shifts over time. Again, that exchange, the quality of relationship changes over time. And then what the follower is interested in is going to change over time. So when you're in that stranger phase, between the leader and the follower, things are very scripted. Again, you've got to see it's a low quality relationship, very transactional, right? Followers just doing what they're asked to do, nothing more than that. So the influence, if we were to draw an arrow, would be strictly from the leader to the follower. But then when we get into this acquaintance phase, then we're like, well, maybe we can start drawing those arrows 2 ways now. So there's a little bit of mixed influence. And the quality is getting better over time. And then in that partnership phase, you know you've reached that level with a person when it's more reciprocal. So the leader's listening to the follower as much as the follower is listening to the leader. And again, it's very high quality. And that follower now doesn't care just about what they want to do. They have more consideration for the organization and the other people that they work with as a whole. Okay. So to talk, again, it's important that you kind of go back through these notes and make sure you caught some of the big pieces about LMX, how it works, what that leadership making process is. But I think to help us understand a little bit more about how it works, we have a case study for you today. So Erin is going to pass that out for me. Okay. What I'd like for you to do, it's 9:50, so I want us to take 10 to 15 minutes. I'll kind of check and see where everybody's at after 10 minutes. But I want you to read through this case study. So there's some overall information about what's going on. This is from a company called America Canola. And we have some employees and a boss. And you're going to get to know a little bit about the relationships between the employees and their boss. And then there's some added information. You have a couple emails that you can see have been sent and letters that have been sent to kind of give you more context to the situation. At the end of it, there are a couple questions you can start thinking about, but we'll come back together as a class after 10 or 15 minutes and we'll answer those questions together. wonder if this room is underneath a lab or something. I don't know. Weird. That was almost a disaster. Has most everyone read through the case study? Maybe not the letters yet, but most of the case study? Take about 2 more minutes to kind of wrap up reading, and we'll start discussing the case a little bit. Can I get someone to describe for me kind of the situation and what's going on here in this case study of American canola?
It's just basically the in and outs theory.
So the in and out. So what's happening? Who are our main characters in this case study?
Lily, Barney, and Ted.
Lily, Barney, Ted. Anybody recognize the names? How I Met Your Mother. Yeah, just so y'all know. So kudos to Bill Weeks for that. So what's happening between Barney? Who is Barney? The CEO. How long has he been the CEO?
Oh, like pretty recently.
Like 2 years. Did he want to be a CEO necessarily?
No.
No. So any of y'all that took 2303, we talk about drift in leadership. Even uses that word, that he just kind of fell into the position, right? And he kind of admits that he's not really good at building relationships with people. Like he has people that work under him that he still doesn't even know their name. And his wife kind of points that out. They didn't come to the Christmas party and he had no clue why or like what was going on. Okay, who's Lily?
A new hire.
New hire. What are your thoughts on her? Do you think she just doesn't like her job or what's going on?
Well, she came from like a work environment that was like very inclusive and like everyone, she like said this, like felt valued. But she also had like a lot of credibility behind her. She was like a go-getter and really loved to share ideas.
Yeah, so on paper, you could see why American Canola probably hired her, right? Very successful, go-getter, known for like big ideas and great new things and building relationships. And yet she's been working for American Canola for 6 months and she hates her job. And it appears from Barney's perspective that she just is a loner. Like it's almost the opposite. Like his perception of her is the opposite of perhaps what her colleagues thought of her at Land O'Lakes. Tell us about Ted. Who's Ted? The golden boy, yeah. Why? Most longevity, so he's been there a while.
He like wanted Barry to be his mentor from the start.
So he went to Barney and said, I want you to invest in me. And so they built this relationship. What else? Is he a little bit of a workaholic, perhaps? A little bit. How does his wife feel about that? Not too happy. But he just, because he keeps wanting to please Barney, keeps taking on more and more. So yeah, we kind of have, do you think, again, that these are pretty adequate descriptions of different people that can work within an organization? Absolutely. And so let's think about this. Lily sends this email to Barney, and it just says something needs to change. What do you think that change was that she was implying? How many of y'all think she wants to quit her job?
I don't think she like necessarily wants to quit her job, but like if this meeting on Monday doesn't go well, like that's something she's already come to.
What do you think she's going to talk about in that meeting that she's requested with Barney?
I think she's going to talk about her work, like where she used to work, and how it was more like involved and like motivated and stuff like that compared to here, and how she would like to help either him become that way, like the workplace become that way,
Do you think she has higher expectations for Barney?
Yes.
Absolutely. What about Ted? How do you think Ted views Barney's leadership as CEO?
I feel like Ted views him more as a friend than the CEO.
Because they've developed that type of relationship. So it would almost be kind of hard for Ted to maybe criticize Barney, right? What would you do if you were Lily in this situation?
I am Lily in the situation right now,
Yes?
and almost like the exact same thing she's doing. I respect her courage, like even just to have a meeting and like talk about it directly. Because I'm more in the boat of like, I'm done, I just want to leave.
Mm-hmm. What do you think Barney can do to make his relationship better with Lily? Is there anything he can do?
I think he needs to educate himself on her position, on like the new hires, because he's like, I don't even know what she does. And like she's out of the office, but if you realize that she's coming from a job, like it's not like she's not coming into work. She's going to work, but it's on the road.
Right. We talk about this and kind of like one of the things that happens the more hierarchy there is in an organization, sometimes the less attached kind of those people in leadership roles can become with other people that work for them. So the fact that he's hired somebody and doesn't even know the job that they're doing can be really concerning, right? That right off the bat can make Lily feel like her boss doesn't care. Okay? Anybody been in an environment where like nobody understands what it is you're doing? Been there, done that. It's like you have to constantly explain the importance of your job. It's like you're having to sell your job to the company that has the job to begin with, right? It's kind of confusing. How do y'all feel about Barney's relationship with Ted?
It kind of reminds me of like, and I'm not just seeing like anyone's like college experiences, but like sort of like a frat boy relationship, like trying to kiss up to the like a pledge, like trying to like talk to like an older member to like get in good, or I don't know. It's almost like I don't know.
Yeah. Do y'all feel like there's anything unprofessional about it?
I think Barney's gotten really comfortable because he didn't really want that job, and it was easy for him to feed Ted all this stuff because he trusted him. But now, like, he doesn't really care about getting another new hire. So Ted is kind of like this one person thing for the comfort of his job that he really wants to do.
Right. And what's hard about it is him and Ted, Barney and Ted, probably had a relationship before he became CEO, right? So they may have been like mutual colleagues on the same level. But then he gets promoted, and so he's in this position now that he's serving as leader to others, and yet that relationship with Ted hasn't really shifted. You know, this can happen in the workplace a lot too. I consider some of my colleagues friends. I can tell you right now, it'd be really weird if one of my friends became my boss, right? It'd be weird. And what we have to be concerned about or considerate of as leaders when that situation happens, because it does, is how do you keep that friendship separate from a professional workplace relationship, right? And so it seems like there's kind of been some mixing of those two things. So what are some of the major parts of LMX that y'all pulled out of this case study? Kind of already said it. We see in and out groups. How do we see that?
Lily kind of mentions it. She says that I used to be between her workplace, and now she comes here and she's like, no one really talks to me.
Yeah.
And even Barney mentions it to his wife, that she doesn't talk to anyone or anything.
Yeah. And so it's interesting, you know, if you think about Lily's perspective, she wants to be a good employee, right? And she feels like she is busting her butt at this new job, trying to prove herself. But yet she feels like she's getting nothing back from her boss, from Barney. Barney's perspective, on the other hand, is like, she's a loner. We don't ever see her. I think she's doing her job, I don't know. It's like two very different realities, right? Which one's right? That's a hard question, because it's a little bit of both. Here's the thing about in and out groups that we've got to remember. Who's in the in group and who's in the out group is not determined by the leader. It's determined by the follower and their perception of what that relationship is. And so because Lily has perceived she's a part of Barney's out group, she's starting to behave like a member of the out group, right? She's not as excited about coming to work anymore. She's just not as committed to the organization. She's thinking about quitting. Again, turnover. Okay, so we've got to think about that. On the other hand, Ted perceives he's a part of the in group. Him and Barney are buds, right? So he's doing more than what's asked of him to do. He's taking on a lot of work. He'll stay up at night to finish a presentation for his boss that his boss probably should have done, right? Those are all characteristics of a person who's in the in group. What's hard from the leader perspective about in and out groups is that we can try to make sure that we're developing high quality relationships with our followers. We can go through that leadership making process, but ultimately the follower has to have that perception that they're in your in group or out group. Are there some people who never want to be a part of the in group? Can anyone give me an example?
I think of like my little kids at the daycare, and there's one girl who does not want to associate with anybody. Like she wants to sit in the corner and she wants to read a book. Nothing wrong. It's not like she'll talk to people, but she just would rather sit in the corner and read a book and not be with anybody.
So sometimes we do have to admit that we have people that may work for us one day, that it doesn't matter what we do, they don't want a relationship with us. And so you can't force people to be in an in group that don't want to be in an in group, and that can be hard. Any other aspects of LMX that you could pull out from this case study beyond just this idea of in group, out group?
I think it's interesting to see the difference between the two emails from Barney. With one talking about promoting Lily's grant application, and the other one describing like him qualifying Ted for some award. And like this grant application is like really more powerful to the company, and it's like literally like 3 or 4 sentences. And that's just kind of like, oof.
Yeah. So definitely a good example of that idea of high quality, low quality relationships. When we have good relationships with others and we know who people are, reference letters are better, right? What we do have to be careful of is bias. Okay, we do have a tendency, if we know someone well, we do have a tendency to use more of those, I don't want to call them anecdotal references, but they're a good person. This person's very dependable. Tell me what they did, right? But it's going to be hard to write a reference letter for someone that you don't have a high quality relationship with because you just don't know a whole lot about them. I tell this to students a lot. Never ask a professor to write you a reference letter just because they are your professor. It's not going to be a good reference letter. All they're going to do is read your resume and copy what's on your resume. You need someone who knows you, right? So that's why it's important to build that relationship. We've come up on our time, but what I'd like for you to do is this last page that had the discussion questions on it, tear it off or tear it out of your case study. If you wrote some of your answers down, that's fine. If you did it not, but put your name on it and give it to Aaron. That way we can give you credit for today's case study. I want y'all to kind of mull over this case study a little bit more. We'll come back to it first thing on Tuesday. Today's Thursday. My brain is not working today. But yeah, just think over it and we'll kind of pick back up on reviewing LMX a little bit. And then Tuesday, we're going to dive into our next situational theory, which is called the situational leadership model. It's going to be a fun one. All right. So see y'all on Tuesday.